Psychoanalysis and Spirituality, Dasha Mahavidya, Matangi. In our journey of trying to introduce ourselves to the Dasha Mahavidya and also try to see how we can open up a space of confluence between the entire area of Dasha Mahavidya and psychoanalysis. In our journey, we have come to the 9th Mahavidya, Matangi, and only one more Mahavidya to study. Matangi is also known as Neela Saraswati, the Blue Saraswati. Almost like an agora form of Saraswati, just as in some spiritual traditions, we have the Agora Ganapati and we have the Agora Lakshmi, we have Matangi as the Neel Saraswati or the Aghor Saraswati. Story of origin and depiction of Matangi. There are two stories of origin we are told. First story is Lord Shiva and Parvati invite Vishnu and Saraswati to their abode at Kailash. When Vishnu and Lakshmi, when Vishnu and Lakshmi come to Kailash, Shiva and Parvati offer food to the guests. While they are eating the food, some part of the food falls down, and from that rises the Mahavidya called Matangi. So she is the Mahavidya, the Devi, which rises from the split over food or the leftover food or the food which has fallen down. Second story of origin. Shiva wants to test Parvati on her loyalty. So he takes the form of an ornament seller and tries to make an advance to Parvati. Parvati recognizes Shiva but plays along in the drama and asks him to meet her at a secluded place, and there she appears in the form of the Neel Saraswati or Matangi. Depiction. She is a blue colored goddess with red clothes, with a skull in her hand and a saber in another hand. So the whole iconography of skull, of cut off head, of a weapon with blood dripping from it, that difficult iconography is back again with Matangi. We saw this iconography completely go away in Tripura Sundari. Also in Dhumavati, the suffering was of a very different type. It was of a helplessness, humiliation, abandonment, the natural forces which bring along old age, sickness and suffering. In Blue Saraswati, we see return of that high energy, high aggression element coming back into Matangi. But Matangi is different from Kali and Tara in that Matangi is the goddess of knowledge, but goddess of occult knowledge, tamasic knowledge, aghor knowledge, subtle knowledge. She wears a crown and there are jewels around, and she raises one of her hands in the gesture of giving moons. And unlike the traditional form of Saraswati, where the white swan or the Hansa is her chariot, here we see two parrots side by side, opposite sides, shown in the iconography. So it's quite an inviting iconography if one wishes to interpret it. But what comes up is she is a very good combination of power and knowledge and prosperity. So Matangi represents a very good combination of knowledge, power, worldly success in relationships, and prosperity. The Bija mantra is Aim. This is what is usually associated with Matangi. But in some rare case, I have also seen these three Bija mantras, Rim, Klim, Hum, getting associated with Matangi. So maybe some schools are using it, but generally the Bija mantra for Matangi is believed to be Aim. Matangi is always offered the leftover food. Something unaesthetic, something unhygienic, something humiliating, something leftover. And the whole idea is to overcome disgust and see the same reality everywhere, regardless of how disgusting, unhygienic, or inauspicious the entity is in front of us. So, to be able to see the divine in everything, no matter how disgusting, is the whole challenge in Matangi. So, one has to overcome the disgust to leftover food, to filthy food, to spoiled food. And this goes to all organic material, because organic material undergoes the decay. And once it undergoes the decay, it becomes filthy, it becomes smelly, it becomes uh, pugnacious, it becomes disgusting, it becomes abhorrent. So, how do you overcome all these feelings of revulsion? So, many of the Mahavidyas actually enhance our capability to handle revulsion, anxiety, fear, and it continues with Matangi. Matangi is the Devi of knowledge, of expression, of arts, and therefore is associated with the throat chakra. She is the goddess of the subtle knowledge, Aghora knowledge. And we see a split here. Saraswati is split into two. The Sattvic Saraswati, who is white in complexion, wearing white clothes and seated on a white Hansa, white swan, versus the Neela Saraswati or Matangi, who is with parrots, who likes things which are filthy, unwholesome, leftover, spoiled, who is the goddess of the tamasic knowledge, subtle knowledge, Aghora knowledge, knowledge of the smashan, knowledge of the dark side. And of course, one has to integrate the two forms of Saraswati to be able to overcome both attachment and revulsion. Same kind of split we see in Lakshmi, where we see the benign Lakshmi and we see the tantric form of Lakshmi. And there again, the integration of Lakshmi is called for. Matangi sadhana can be done by a householder. Unlike in case of Dhumavati, this is not a lonely sadhana. This is not a pleasureless sadhana. This is not a sadhana of suffering like in Dhumavati. This is a sadhana of high energy of overcoming revulsion. But it is also a sadhana which brings prosperity and enhances the relationship between husband and wife. So this is a sadhana which can be done by a householder, and it helps in enhancing prosperity, relationships, and overcoming the spiritual problem of revulsion. In this sadhana of Matangi, the problems are directly dealt with as we find them. It is like as is where is basis. Unlike in case of Dhumavati, where problems are intensified and created by virtue of suffering and deprivation. Because in Dhumavati, many of the problems are created by virtue of suffering and deprivation. Had suffering and deprivation not been there, certain forms of envy, bitterness, destructiveness would not have come to exist in the mind of the person who is suffering. So in Dhumavati, we are far more intense in suffering and then looking at problems arising from suffering as well as problems independent of suffering, which always were there. Comparatively, Matangi is a much pleasurable sadhana compared to Dhumavati. Very interestingly, Matangi is also the goddess of all the Aghor mantras, and therefore all the mantras used in all the Mahavidyas. And the entire knowledge of Mahavidyas is presided over by Matangi, because Matangi is the goddess of the entire tantric wisdom, tantric knowledge, Aghor knowledge, and Mahavidya definitely is one of those forms of knowledge. So if we look at all the knowledge of Mahavidyas and all the mantras used in any of the Mahavidya, Matangi is the goddess of all mantras and all practices used in the sadhana of Mahavidya. By this token, one is tempted to ask, why is then Matangi not placed as the first Mahavidya? Because it would be better to worship the Mahavidya, which is the Mahavidya of all the mantras and yantras and tantras, which later we are going to use for each and every Devi. The reason can be many. For some sadhakas, maybe this could be done, but the conventional sequence is that we come to the aspect of prosperity and pleasure after the Mahavidya of suffering, and we would like to end with Mahavidyas which are more positive and more profitable in the practical sense of the term. And so we are looking at Matangi and Kamla, both of which are very profitable in one sense, in the social sense, ordinary, everyday sense of the term. Psychoanalytically, what are the issues which come up? In the sadhana of Matangi, certain issues come up which we deal with in psychoanalysis also. The first issue is of disgust, the disgust of leftover food, filthy food, spoiled food. Second is the act of humiliation if one has to eat such leftover food, such spoiled food. Then is the element of social shame if one has to practice eating that in front of everyone. The sadhana of Matangi helps one overcome these things. It's like you force yourself to do what you don't want to do, and you keep doing it till you are completely free from it. It's to hold the bull by both his horns till the bull is completely tamed and you are free from the bull. So, in Matangi sadhana, we overcome disgust, humiliation, shame. This sadhana is also very good to address phobia and avoidance. So, any form of avoidance can be addressed by Matangi sadhana. Matangi is also the goddess of knowledge, but some particular forms of knowledge which are occult, subtle, strange, and tamasic. So the whole element of strangeness, revulsion, occult, our being in comfort with this area psychologically is developed by Matangi sadhana. Matangi sadhana also helps in overcoming issues related to being lonely, unique, and feeling abandoned by the group. And these are very often causes of suffering. Loneliness, feeling always the odd man out, not belonging, not at home in any group, and feeling abandoned by the group. Issues related to love, attachment, company are also dealt with in this sadhana. The pleasure of occult knowledge and the pleasure of the superego as one succeeds in these occult practices, that also is the area touched upon by sadhana of Matangi. Personal growth by radical experiences, uncommon experiences, experiences which may be of paranormal type, which may be of mystical type, which may be of spiritual type, which may be of uh, mythological type. Stanislav Grof would call holotropic experiences. Not exactly, but something on those lines. Growth by offbeat experiences, uncommon experiences. And using tamasic knowledge for healing and growth. And this is very controversial and very repulsive. And everyone takes a holier than thou position and comes down heavy, beating this movement. For example, take the practices of Shakta path, which may include consumption of meat, wine, consumption of sex during the spiritual process, or it may go even to the extent of giving animal sacrifices. The entire spectrum becomes repulsive, revulsive, abhorrent. But despite its being politically incorrect and deeply disturbing type of experiences, these practices can produce results, great results. So we are told in tradition. And using this without revulsion, without fear, for healing and growth, that is also an aspect of Matangi. translated into psychoanalysis, we would be looking at very subtle mystical and spiritual practices, not going as far as Agora would go, but opening up slightly more to spiritual and mystical practices and bringing them up in psychoanalysis for healing and growth. Enhancement of affect tolerance. This happens in all the Mahavidyas and continues in Matangi. And reality acceptance, where you overcome revulsion, accept the reality without revulsion, and then not only embrace but celebrate that reality. What was leading to revulsion before now leads to celebration. So this whole journey from revulsion to celebration is the journey of Matangi. Thank you.